Hey everyone, hope everyone is doing well. My pal over at the channel Chilling Nightmares is going to be helping me out with some of the readings today, so be sure to check out his channel and show him some love. I'll put the link to his channel down in the description. And now, on to the stories.
Number 1. The Backseat. So this happened last year in October. I needed groceries, so I went to the supermarket. It was a fairly large store, and I remember I was going around picking up things that I needed and occasionally looking at things that interested me. I remember being in the canned food area when I noticed a man look at me from my peripheral vision. He was around 6'2" and of a muscular build. I really didn't think much of it though at the time and dismissed it as him looking at other stuff that were placed in front of me. I continued to pick up stuff and then left the aisle, but I could have sworn he was following me. As I went through more stuff in the store, I noticed he literally came wherever I went. I was feeling really uneasy by then. So I got my phone out of my pocket. It was one of those candy bar phones that had that useful fake call feature, so I pressed the fake call button and pretended I was on the phone. I walked off to the checkout area and was relieved he was not there. As I was walking out of the store, I noticed someone was beside my car. It was the same man. He was bent down staring inside. At this point, I started to panic, turning to people for help, but no one helped me. I went back inside and told one of the men that were standing there. He agreed to check and see if anyone was out there by my car. When he came back, he said no one was there. I thanked him and then left the store. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, a man started knocking on my driver's side window. I was still scared, so I sped off the parking lot, not caring if I was breaking any traffic laws. While I was driving, I was thinking about what just happened, when something caught my eye. It was the same man, and he was in the back seat, staring at me like I didn't know. My heart sunk. It felt like the whole world turned around and I felt sick to my stomach. Despite feeling like that, I decided to play calm and drive to an area where there was a lot of people. I didn't look back but once, but when I did, I could see something in his hand, and it was shiny. When I got to a street where there were a few people walking around, I opened my car door casually and started running like hell. I could hear my car door open behind me, but I was too shocked to look back. I didn't realize I left the keys in the car, but I didn't really care. After running to the other side of the street, I found a couple. I told them what had just happened and they called the police for me. When they came, the car wasn't there. I gave them the full details of what happened. A few days later, they contacted me and told me they found the car abandoned. Needless to say, I didn't step back into that car for a while. Number 2. Wales Hospital. So to set the scene, I guess I could be classed as an urban explorer. I like to explore old and abandoned buildings around the UK and Europe. Me and my fiance and a couple of our friends had driven to Wales to check out a few places. 4 hours away and a long way from home. We had been looking around places all day, starting off with a huge old factory near Pontypridd before moving on to a coal mine in Crumlin. Now by this time, it was the evening, and although it wasn't dark yet, the light was starting to fade. We looked around the mine, took some photos, and decided to start heading back to the Midlands. Just as we were about to leave, a car pulled up in front of us and an oldish guy got out. I had never seen him before, but he addressed me by my first name as if he was a friend and asked me where else I had been that day. Now this was weird because I maintain little online presence. The only people who really know me online are the people who know me in real life. Anyways, after a while he told me there was an abandoned hospital in the next town and to follow him. We were kind of intrigued, so we figured, why not? We drove for around a half an hour until we arrived at this old building on the edge of a small, slightly rundown Welsh mining town. The guy that just said goodbye and left us there. We were a bit creeped out by the whole situation, but thought nothing too much of it and weren't too worried as there were 4 of us and it was the direction of home anyways. By this time it was getting dark and everything was bathed in a cold blue glow as the sun went down behind rain clouds, so we got some flashlights and went to have a look inside the hospital. As soon as I got near the building, a feeling of dread completely overwhelmed me. This was weird in itself because I've been going to these places for years now, and few things truly scare me as a result. But anyways, I brushed this aside and we all went inside to explore. This was a creepy building, with peeling paint, plaster on the floors, and body bags tied with ropes to the ceiling. That was enough for me. It was dark and I couldn't be bothered with this creepy old smackden. Me and my fiancé decided to go outside and wait for our friends to finish looking around. As we waited, we became very aware of someone walking around in the undergrowth near to us, shining a dim flashlight around and whispering to themselves. One set of footsteps became 2 and then 3 until there were several people in the woods surrounding this building. With that, we shouted to our friends to get the hell out of there. We left and we never looked back. Number 3. Late nights. This happened a couple years ago. I've always worked the 3 to 11 shift at my job and would get home around midnight. We lived in a safe area where there was not much crime, just the occasional theft like a bike stolen. My wife would usually stay up to wait for me, mostly because the neighbors a couple houses down had a German Shepherd that they would leave in the front yard. One night, I told her just to go to sleep since she had to be up at 5 the next morning for a double shift. And personally, I had no issue with this dog since he has gotten out before and I was able to handle him, but still made her worry. When I got home from work that night, I parked a couple houses down from my place. I gathered my stuff, got out of the car, and started walking when I noticed that there was someone standing by the tree in the front yard of the house that I would have to walk past. I froze, unsure what to do, so I reached into my bag to grab my phone to call my wife. Unfortunately, I had so much junk in my bag that I was having trouble finding it. I was a little bit freaked out. It looked like the guy was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't really see what it was because there was no street lights. All of a sudden, the figure started to move towards me, so I started to walk back to my car. That's when they started to run. I panicked. The next thing I know, the neighbor's dog was on the guy. At that moment, the neighbors came out and whistled for the dog, and the suspicious guy ran. I was shaking so bad. The neighbor noticed and came up to me. I explained what happened. His wife went and rang my doorbell to tell my wife, and then they called the cops. The police came and recovered a knife the person had dropped when the dog had grabbed them.
Number 4. A few years ago, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I decided to take the next step in our relationship and move in together. After a good deal of searching, we finally found a house to rent that was within our price range. It was in a pretty good area of town, the landlord seemed like a pretty decent guy, and the house was in pretty good shape. We paid our first month's rent, and the safety deposit, and got the metaphorical key. I say metaphorical because the front and back door lock use a code rather than a traditional key. Everything started off great, but we quickly moved out of the honeymoon phase. Neither of us had lived with anyone other than our parents, so it was quite a big change. On top of that, the house was a little creepy at night. The house itself wasn't creepy. I think it was mainly the fact that we were both out of our regular comfort zones and the place was new to us. That being said, within the span of a month, quite a few strange things had been happening. I had, and still have, a regular before-bed routine that I learned from my dad. I walk through the house, turn the lights off, and check all the doors to make sure they are locked. Yet, every few days, my wife would yell at me, saying that the front or back door was left unlocked. It bothered me, but I always just chalked it up to my crappy memory and figured I had just forgot to lock them. It wasn't until a few other things started happening that we began to think something was wrong with our house. Weekly chores were a big thing in both of our family homes, so we had our household duties in our new home. One of mine was to clean the spare room, which was my gaming room. I was often scolded for not cleaning the room, even though I knew I had just cleaned it a day or two earlier. Few mornings, when I went into the kitchen to make coffee, I would find the pickle jar on the counter. neither of us would remember having a midnight snack. So we figured one of us must be sleepwalking. And then a couple of my wife's bras and a couple pairs of her used underwear disappeared. My wife was convinced that we were being haunted by some sort of perverted ghost. She said she had looked into it and it all seemed like the signs of a poltergeist. I am not a believer in the paranormal, so I did what any human being would do. I looked up how to change the combination for the lock and created a new passcode for both doors. A few nights later, we went out for dinner and a movie. We had put a load of laundry in before we left, so when we came home, my wife sat down to watch TV, and I went straight downstairs to grab the clothes. I was about to walk into the bedroom when the bed caught my attention. I jumped and yelped. My girlfriend quickly ran over and asked what was wrong. I laughed and pointed at the bed. The blankets were crumpled up in just the right way that it looked like someone was curled up underneath them. I put the laundry basket down and walked over to the bed. I said something along the lines of, "That looks so real," and moved to push my hand down on the blankets. A wave of sheer panic overcame me when I felt something solid underneath my hand. The figure beneath the blankets shot into a sitting position, still covered up. My wife screamed, and I shouted for her to get out of the house as I ran toward the door. I pulled it shut and threw the small hallway table in front of the door before following her out of the house. As I ran down the hall, I heard the door opening. We went next door and called the police immediately. They checked the house over but found it empty. They told us they would keep the house under surveillance for the night and suggested we stay at a hotel. The next morning, we were contacted by the police, saying that they arrested a man trying to sneak into the house through the back door. It turns out that the man was the previous tenant to my wife and I. He was extremely mentally unstable and had been evicted by our landlord. In addition, this guy had a few restraining orders filed against him for stalking. I still wanted to know how he managed to get into the house, considering I had changed the combination. My landlord told me that the lock had the ability to store 3 combinations at a time. Apparently, he had forgotten to erase the last combination. Number 5. This happened to my cousin when he was 13, about 6 years ago. They lived in a large, 1-story house in the middle of around a 100-acre field. My cousin lived with his mother, father, and younger brother in relative comfort due to being the only humans for miles. One day, while playing outside, his brother stopped and pointed to the farthest north side of the field. It was an incredibly sunny day, so my cousin had to squint to see what it was. There at the edge of the field was a glistening light, similar to a reflection off of a shiny car in the right sunlight. There was obviously something at the edge of the field. After about a minute or so later of him staring intently at the shine, it disappeared. That night at dinner, he told his mom and dad about what he had seen, but they brushed it off as a creation of his overactive imagination. Around 9:30, he was sent off to bed. While putting on his pajamas, he noticed something on top of his clothes in his dresser. It was a photo of him at school. He brushed it off as one his mom took and then left as a little joke, as she often did. He flipped it over, and on the back it read, "My baby at school," with a handwritten smiley face. He went to tuck the picture into his desk drawer when suddenly a flash of lightning illuminated his room. Oddly, there was no rumble of thunder that he could recall. Climbing into bed, another flash of lightning struck close to his room, but still, no thunder. Being a 13-year-old, even though he didn't want to admit it, he was still afraid of storms, so he flipped the light off and hid under his covers. After a few minutes of silence, he resurfaced and closed his eyes. Instantly, he was jerked awake by another blinding flash, followed by another, and another, some in rapid succession. He told me that this happened all through the night, and finally, around 3 a.m., it stopped, at which time he finally fell asleep. The next morning is when everything turned to total chaos. He awoke to his mother screaming. She had opened his closet to put something inside and was greeted with a dozen or so Polaroids hanging from fishing line. They were of him, getting off the bus, playing on the playground, and in the back field, also from the previous night sleeping in his bed. The police were immediately called and upon arriving, found a box in the back of the closet containing a note that read, "To my love, only walls separate us," and what looked to be a clump of hair. They concluded that the photos were taken over the span of 3 years. They ended up moving to a different town very shortly after.